Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us. We are grateful to have you. So I sent you a message to see if you want me to do your intro or if you'd be willing to do your own so that you can give us a little bit of like your origin story, a little bit of an activist, and from how you came to this work, some of the things you've done, and then dive in from there. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Wonderful. Mike's all yours.
Am I on? Just like that?
Yeah, we're just jumping right in.
Okay. And I have until 3:15, 12:15 your time, yeah?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, hi everyone. Let me see some hands, even some noise. Okay. I have to tell you all, it's so weird doing this through a screen. And in all transparency, I have a bit of a flu. So if at any point I sneeze like 1,000 times in a row, that's what's happening. I'm fine, but it seems to come unexpectedly. My name is Kerri Kelly. My pronouns are she, her. I'm coming to you in this particular moment. I'm actually on the road for a few months from the land of the Lenape people. But I typically reside in Los Angeles, not far from Tessa. What do we call you in this context, Tessa?
Call me Tessa.
Okay. I was like, Professor Tessa? What is the and I'm super grateful to be in this conversation with you all. Tessa has told me a bit about this class and also about the journey, the work that you all are about to embark on over the next couple months as fellows of social justice work. Is that correct? Is that my understanding that y'all are about to enter this new phase of not just learning, but like learning in the field, which we called praxis, right? And practice and the application of what we have learned in real life, IRL. And this is a particular sweet spot for me. I tend to kind of play at not just the intersection of embodiment and justice, of well-being and politics, these sort of two seemingly disparate concepts, but I also tend to practice and play in between theory and practice, in between research and application. So this moment that you all are in when you're about to apply and embody all that you've learned in the field is a really exciting one. And it's an inquiry, not just a cognitive inquiry, but an embodied inquiry that has been a really big part of my life. And it's a big part of my life because I've been organizing for about 20 years now. I didn't start on this path. I don't know that I was born an activist. I was sort of born into a very kind of predetermined and predictable blueprint, if you will, of circumstances. And I sort of like climbed the ladder and played by the rules and checked all the boxes for a really long time in my life. And my big wake-up call was 9/11. My stepdad was a fireman who was stationed a couple blocks from Ground Zero and saw the second plane hit and ran right into Tower 2 and up 78 flights of stairs and saved countless lives, I would imagine, and also, died when those towers came down. And so that was a massive, massive wake-up call for me, as it was for so many people, and really disrupted everything I thought I knew about everything, y'all. Like everything I had learned about what it meant to be normal or successful or safe really came down with those towers. And so that began my journey. I don't know if I would call it my journey of activism. I think it was my journey of seeking the truth of how we got here and of who we are. And of what it's going to take for us to be well in the world. And that put me on a journey of yoga and mindfulness and wellness and embodiment and somatics, and eventually landed me in political organizing, because I realized that so many of the problems that we're navigating right now can't be solved with personal solutions. They're systemic problems, they're historical problems, they're collective problems, and they require systemic, collective, and whole responses. And that's really what landed me here. But the other thing that makes this inquiry really essential for me is that I'm also a white-bodied, cisgender, straight, sometimes able-bodied organizer, navigating systems and gaps, and impacts that impact us differently and disproportionately, given my position of privilege. And that's invited for me a particular practice of curiosity and discernment around how to be, how to engage, how to relate across lines of difference, how to listen and how to learn, without replicating and reinforcing a lot of the patterns and paradigms that we're here to transform. And that's a bit of what I wanted to share with you all today as you get ready to sort of embark on this next phase of your work and of your journey, is really an inquiry into what it means to embody impact, and how to find our right role and responsibility in the movement or in the work. And I know I'm using a lot of like lofty words. I find that sometimes there's like movement speak that we get caught up in, and people are like, I don't know what you mean when you say movement. So when I say movement, to be clear, what I mean is the movement of equity and liberation, and equity being a corrective strategy towards liberation and the conditions where everyone gets what they need to thrive. Does that make sense, y'all, as like sort of a baseline of what I mean when I say those words? Okay, cool. Because I know there's lots of different movements, lots of different organizing efforts addressing different issues and different sites within the larger ecosystem. But often when I'm talking about that, that's sort of what I'm talking about. And that came from my own inquiry of like, what does it mean to be well? And what do I need to be well? And what conditions need to exist to be well? And I quickly realized in that inquiry that for me to be well meant for all people to be well, and that my individual well-being and liberation were very much tied up with the well-being and liberation of all people. And so this conversation, this inquiry is not just deeply personal, it's deeply political. And I don't believe that, in fact, you can ever separate the two of those. So you'll hear me kind of touch on both of those throughout this talk. Does that sound like something y'all want to be in a conversation about? I'll just start there. Okay. If you see me leaning into the box, it's just because I'm like, where are y'all, like ants in the screen for me? So I'm trying to gauge. So I want to invite y'all to feel free to like speak, also like nod your head, give me some like signals that like things are landing for you, and or even this is fine, like what the hell are you talking about is also a data point for me. This way I can kind of gauge. It's much easier being in a room with y'all, but I want to be able to, like, to the best of my ability, be with you and sort of relate and follow sort of where you're at with this conversation. So I thought I would start by sharing a couple insights that I've had over time. And these are insights that are shared by lots of brilliant and amazing people. I've learned a great deal from a great number of people, and I'll share them as we go. And then I want to kind of get through some of these points. So imagine like I'm seeding, I'm planting seeds with you. So I'm going to stir you up a bit. I'm also going to like throw a lot at you, and I'm going to follow up with some resources. I know that Tessa shared my chapter with you. So if you read that, you'll have some backdrop as to what I'm going to talk about. But I know we only have a bit of time, and I just really want to resource you all to the best of my ability and give you as many tools as I can to help you prepare yourself for what's next. And not just prepare yourself so that you like so-called perform in a skillful way, but also so that like you have the self-awareness and the capacity building going into this sort of next like phase of your work. So I'm going to share a couple things that I hope will make you more curious and invite you, maybe inspire you to want to like dig in a little bit more and sort of untangle, I think, some of what a lot of us are here for, which is to better understand ourselves and ourselves in relationship with each other. And then at the end, I'm going to open up the space for some questions and conversation. And like I said, I'm going to follow up with some of these tools so that you can dig deeper. So don't feel like you have to like retain every piece of information or remember everything. I'll follow up with the deck, and I'll also follow up with some resources so that y'all feel like you have like a toolkit, a toolbox, a backpack that you can take with you as you sort of like get ready for this next iteration of your work. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, great. Hold on 1 second. Let me pull this up for y'all. Okay. Okay. Can y'all see that? Thumbs up. Brilliant. Sound, thumbs up. That's great. Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can do this.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. So when Tessa said, well, what is the thing you're going to be presenting? I thought about this idea of like finding our right role and responsibility in the movement, because I love the invitation and the inquiry in this title. It understands that all of us are located in different places, right? And I don't mean that literally, like where you're located in a conference room right now, but I'm talking about social location, and I'll define that in a moment for you. But it also means that we've all been impacted in really different and disproportionate ways, right, by the dynamic systems of oppression that we are a part of. And so our role, right, in this movement, given that our responsibility, even like the ways that we heal and recover, are really unique to our positionality and our location. And I have found this, y'all, to be like one of the most essential and really skillful tools and practices that I've cultivated, because it's on one hand, it's like radical self-awareness, right? That you bring into any relationship or any collaboration or any work that you're doing. But it also attends to accountability and repair, right? And right role and responsibility given from where the unique place from where we come from. And so I thought this would be a good context for our conversation as you all get ready for this sort of next phase. So the first thing I want and I'm going to do a little bit of level setting here because I don't know a lot about what analysis you all are already bringing to this conversation. So I'm going to like name a few things that are probably already known to you, but for the sake of developing for all of us a shared sense of learning and understanding as we go into this inquiry together. So the first thing I want to acknowledge is that we are all shaped by many different things, right? Many different forces out in the world. And this is sort of just a like amalgamation of all of the things that might shape who we are and how we come into the world. And by shape, y'all, I mean a lot of different things, right? We're shaped in our proximity to power and privilege, right? But we're also shaped in our behavior, in our patterns, right? We're shaped in belief and in what we internalize from the messages that we receive from dominant culture. Our experience is shaped, our worldview, how we understand the world, right, is shaped from our interactions and experiences with many of these things. So you'll see lots of things in here, race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, uh, um, body, right? But there's also like generation, etiquette, employment, transportation, inheritance, addiction, ethnicity, housing, right? So like you can only imagine all of the ways in which our lived experience, right, is impacted, is imprinted, right, by all of these forces, right, that we're exposed to from the moment we come into the world, right? So these are the many sites of shaping, and we're not going to like unpack all of these sites of shaping, but I wanted to start there because I think sometimes we have a very narrow view of how we're shaped or what identities we embody. And in fact, we're all extremely complex beings that are shaped. And I say shaped in the past tense, but shaped and being shaped, right, in real time, right, by all of these forces all of the time. And so I'm hoping this invites some curiosity for you, right, around how have you been shaped? Right, in your lived experience in the world, right? And you can unpack each one of these, right? What was your experience of transportation growing up, right? Did you have inheritance, right? Or a family of inheritance, right? What was your experience of religion, right? Or race or class, right? What is the region that you grew up in? Was it rural? Was it urban, right? What is the culture you were exposed to that might have shaped you, right? And what I want to say about sites of shaping is that sites of shaping are relatively neutral until you apply a power analysis to this, right? So if not for history, if not for systems and structures of power that are at work, right? These would just be kind of like relative sites of shaping, right? But we know that these are not neutral sites of shaping because of how things have been structured, constructed, right? Imposed and enforced on us, right? Historically and in present time, okay? So this inquiry really is around where are you located, right, in systems of oppression and systems of power. And this is where I'm going to give you your first tool. And this is one of the tools that I shared with Tessa. It should be attached, I think, to the chapter that you all received. But if it's not, I'm going to follow up with this. So have you ever heard of this term social location, y'all? Has anyone heard of this? No, yes. Okay, great. So some yes, some no is what I'm seeing. So I like to define words always just to make sure we understand what we mean when we say a particular words, because we also know that language is political and relative. So social location is one's proximity to power and to privilege, right? Based on one's social group memberships or political identities. And a lot of those are some of the things that we just saw. Race, gender, sexual orientation, education, class, disability, and so on and so forth, right? Are all categories of difference, right? That are a part of sort of this hierarchy of bodies that we are all a part of. And social location speaks specifically to where we are uniquely situated within the dynamic system of oppression and how it informs how we show up. Now, social location, y'all, isn't about who you are. It has nothing to do with your worthiness, right? Or your inherent belonging. It's not even related to things that have happened personally to you, right? This has to do with the social group memberships that you are a part of and how they are valued in dominant culture. Does that make sense, y'all? How they are treated, right? In dominant culture. And so I'm going to give you this sort of tool. This is called a social location wheel. This does not have all of the sites of shaping on it that I mentioned on the first slide, but it has some really salient ones that we know situate us very deliberately, either close to power and privilege, right? Or away from it, marginalized, right? Excluded, under-resourced, oppressed. So at the center of this wheel is privilege and all of the things that we associate with privilege. And on the outskirts of the wheel, what you might call the margins of the wheel, right, represent that which is furthest removed, right? And for each one of the spokes on the wheel, right, we could have a conversation about which identities are more proximal, right, to power and privilege, and which identities are furthest removed, right? And we can do that for every one of these categories, right? And then on a personal level, we can then locate ourselves on this wheel. So I'll use myself as an example, right? I am white-bodied, right? And on the racial category spoke, white is probably most proximal, not probably, completely, to privilege based on what we understand of the racial history, especially within the US, although race is playing out all over the world in really different ways. And so if I were to actually assess myself based on my social group memberships for each one of these categories, right? I would find myself more proximal to privilege. And I did this with an intersectional lens because what we know, thanks to Kimberly Crenshaw, is that categories of difference and social group memberships don't work in isolation. They overlap, right? And when they overlap, they compound, right? So the experience of privilege is compounded when you have multiple sites of privilege. The experience of oppression is compounded when you have multiple sites of oppression. And all of us have different sites of privilege and oppression. So the invitation here is for you all to get clear about what privileges, right, you might be bringing to an engagement, right? Where you might have privilege, where you might have more proximity, where you might be more resourced or more included or more uplifted, given your embodied identities, and where you might be more excluded, under-resourced, right? And oppressed, right? In this sort of dynamic system that was set up for us, okay? So that's one sort of layer of this inquiry, is to know where you are located, right? So that you can bring that lens, that perspective, right, to the table. And what I can share with you about this inquiry is, and I'm going to ask this at the end, is that our privilege and oppression comes with different limitations and different opportunities, right? And so when you are aware fully of what you're bringing, and we're going to talk about some of the manifestations of these locations in a moment, but just in pure positionality, right? When you bring an awareness, right, to relationships or to any kind of work that you're doing in the world, right? So that awareness might be, so as a white-bodied person, for example, I do a lot of work in racial justice, and I'm always bringing an awareness, right? That even as I work to dismantle systems of oppression, white supremacy, racism, I benefit from it. And that's a nuance I have to bring to every relationship, every project, every organizing initiative that I have. right? That I am not exempt, that I am implicated simply because of the skin that I walk in. And that brings a certain level of responsibility and accountability to how I work with folks around these issues, right? It means that I have to like listen and learn first, right? That most of what I understand about race, I am learning, right? While other folks are living, right? Issues of race. And so those are some of the inquiry and the conversations that you can have with yourself once you have a more nuanced sense of your social location, right? Depending on the different issues or the different um, intersections you're going to be working at. Does that make sense, y'all, as like an invitation and as a tool? Okay, I'm going to keep going and then I'm going to come back to this. Okay, so the other thing that I want to share as like a level set, and this is one of my favorite quotes. It's actually by a spoken word poet named Guante. And I would encourage you all, I'll try and find the link and include it in the follow-up. He has this incredible spoken word poem, and this is just literally one piece of it. But what Guante is speaking about in this quote is how culture operates. And so Guante says, white supremacy is not the shark, it's the water, right? White supremacy is not about good people or bad people. It's not about us or them necessarily, right? It's the water that we are swimming in, right? It's the air that we are breathing. And that means that none of us operate outside of this paradigm, right? We're all swimming in this water. We're all breathing this air, even though we might be impacted in really different and disproportionate ways, right? There's no escape. And I say that because I think sometimes when we get into work that's righteous, or some of us sometimes might do retreats or engage in spiritual activities that sometimes give us the illusion that we can transcend these systems, right? It's sort of like a false paradigm. There is no escape, right, from the container that we are a part of, right? So it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. It's like, how do we navigate the toxic water, right? The toxic soup that we swim in, right? This inheritance, right? Or how do we navigate this toxic air that we breathe? And I really love the analogy of air because, and we're going to get to this in a minute, air implies that this toxicity of unequal systems, right? Unequal and unjust systems that we are a part of, that is in the past and in the present, isn't just happening out here, that we breathe in this air, right? We internalize these patterns and these paradigms, right? And they end up literally biologically shaping us, right? If we don't have a really rigorous and diligent practice of detoxing and recovering ourselves inside of these systems, right? It also affirms that there's, a paradox, right? That we are inside of these systems, right? Enrolled in these systems, even while we resist and rage against them, right? That's a contradiction that we're going to need to navigate at times. Does that make sense, y'all? So we never get to step outside of it and be like, that's bad, right? We're always inside of it, navigating, right? How to do our best to reduce harm, right? And to not replicate these systems even while we're a part of them. And I just want to say, I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of doing social justice work in these times, is that there is no purity, there is no perfect way of engaging. There's actually holding this really complex paradox of how to like how to from within, like rage against the machine, even while it runs the show. Okay. So white supremacy is not the shark, it's the water. And the water has a current, right? The water is not still. There is a very intentional and deliberate current to the water, right? Which is sort of this current, right, of power that we're always navigating. And socialization, right, is the process, right? The ongoing, pervasive, persistent, perpetual process of how we get trained to play our assigned roles, right, in these dynamic systems of inequality and injustice, right? This is the sort of like cultural training that we receive from birth. And this is another tool that I'm going to include in your follow-up, but it's an incredible, incredible articulation by a sociologist named Bobby Harrow. Have any of you heard of this? It's called the cycle of socialization. No. And it basically walks one through the experience of socialization from birth to now, so that we can get more critical about examining what we learned about the rules, right? That the rules that society imposed upon us, the assumptions and the beliefs, the ways of being that we may have inherited from our caregivers or the people most proximal to us, the ways in which we were taught through reward and enforcement, right, to either follow the rules or else. And the thing I really appreciate about this cycle, y'all, is that it affirms that it is happening in real time. And I think sometimes when we talk about shaping, we talk about this thing that happened in the past when we were younger, and now that we're aware and woke, we know better. But the reality is we're being racialized and socialized all of the time by the water. And I say that because I think it demands of us a level of rigor and discipline and curiosity and questioning as we navigate these waters, right? Especially in the context of this work, because you're going to go into institutions and organizing projects and social justice centers, maybe community centers. And I think sometimes we bring an assumption that these are places that are inoculated from dominant culture and from all that comes with that, but they're not, right? We are all swimming in this water. And so it's important for us to bring that lens, right? That curiosity, that critique to all of the places that we move within, even the places with the best of intentions. And so I'll just give you a quick glimpse of this tool before we move on. And the thing that I appreciate about this tool is Bobby Harrow says that our socialization begins before we are born, right? With no choice of our own, right? Because we are born into a context that already exists, right? We are born into a history that has already happened. We are born into unequal structures and systems. We are born into unique contexts depending on our family structures and dynamics. And so I say that because I think sometimes there's a narrative about how we're born pure, but we're in fact born into a compromised world, right? We're socialized before we even take our first breath, right? And that feels really important because it also calls us to be curious about what happened before we came into the world, right? And we know now through epigenetics, right, that we also like carry within us an inheritance of DNA and genes and behavior and resilience and assumptions and worldview, right, that we actually pay forward. And so this idea of time is really relative in that sense. But as soon as we're born, we're obviously like socialized by the people we are most proximal to, the caretakers who are responsible for for literally our nourishment and our survival. And so that's when we start to develop expectations. We start to learn traditions and history. Um, we start to mimic norms and habits that we see the people closest to us. We start to develop a sense of values and dreams, roles and responsibilities in those first moments. And then once we move outside of that sort of like immediate nuclear experience, we start to be exposed to different spaces and systems, right? You go to school, you have peer groups, you go to the playground, maybe you move through hospitals, you're exposed to books and media. And all of these messages, right, flow through those portals to us, right? About who we are, about who we're supposed to be, about how we're supposed to act, about who is valued and ideal in this dominant paradigm and who isn't, about what behaviors get rewarded, right? And what behaviors get punished. And so this is where we start to, and so you can only imagine, I'm sharing this cycle because it really landed for me how persistent and perpetual this cycle is, right? We're learning and we don't even know we're learning, right? We're getting trained and inducted into the system without even consenting to it, right? And many of us, right, are just like, oh, this is how the world works. This is how I need to behave in order to play by the rules or get good grades or climb the ladder or get into college or get a job, right? And we never question whether or not that is in fact the truth. And so what makes this cycle really complicated, Bobby says, right, is that these so-called rules, these invisible rules, right, are either rewarded by people in power or not, right? There's enforcement involved, right? And so if you do something, if you're obedient or compliant with the rules, maybe you get better grades or you get a job or you get a pat on the back or you get a reward, right? But if you don't fit in to the dominant paradigm, or if you choose, right, to go outside of the norm, right? If you choose to resist or reject or be disobedient, right? There are very real consequences. There are very real consequences. And that's what makes this cycle so hard to step outside of. And so anyway, so I'm going to share this whole cycle and all and the chapter that accompanies it because it's really juicy. But the last thing I'll share about this is that what Bobby says breaks the cycle. And we go around this cycle. The cycle is it's not sequential, it's not fixed, it's dynamic. So like we're going around and around and around all the time. Even now, I am still being socialized constantly, right? What Bobby says breaks the cycle is at some point when we become aware of this sort of like invisible training, this socialization that's at work, right? Everywhere we have a choice, right? We can choose to, divest, question, resist, do something different, right? Or we can keep going along to get along, keep doing the familiar, keep following the rules. Now, um, uh, uh, um, the risk, right, of stepping outside of this cycle is different. And I would say disproportionate based on our social location. So it's not as simple as like change your mind, leave the cycle. But I do find it really a really powerful and provocative like challenge, right? That like once you know, right, what will you do? Once you know, right, that there is this cycle at work, that is just trying to keep the current going and keep us caught up in the current, right? What will you do? What does it look like to step outside, to do something different, right? And that to me is the like creative and imaginative inquiry that I think we're all a part of, because many of us don't know what it is, right, to step outside of the cycle. So, the last piece I want to share with you all, and then I want to kind of get into a conversation about what this means for you all, literally, and how you are going to step into this next phase, is that so white supremacy is the water. We're all located in different places based on the assigned roles, the unequal roles that we were born into, that we are living into, right? And then we're constantly being socialized, right? And inducted into this system if we're not paying attention. And the other thing that's happening, and I mentioned this when I talked about the air, is that we are internalizing, right? Often in ways that are unconscious to us. We are internalizing a lot of the messages that we're receiving from dominant culture. And what I mean by internalizing is we're in probably ways that you're not aware of. We're either like buying into the beliefs on like a subconscious level, or we're acting out from that place, right? Our behaviors, right? So behaviors like entitlement, right, is an expression of internalized supremacy, right? Urgency is an expression of internalized supremacy, right? And so this is not just a like invitation to be aware of your position and then to be engaging from a place of awareness. We also have to get really curious and critical about like what might be embedded in our tissues and in our bones that we're not aware of, right? And this is the shaping, literal shaping, like somatic and biological shaping that we're learning about now through the science of trauma, right? That trauma isn't something that just happens out there, it gets lodged in the body, right? And so does cultural conditioning and enforcement and trauma. And so this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from an incredible writer, abolitionist, activist, and organizer named Miriam Kaba that I think speaks to the power and the pervasiveness of these internalizations. Miriam says, "We are so deeply entangled in the very systems we are organizing to change. White supremacy, misogyny, ableism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia exist everywhere. We have all so thoroughly internalized the logics of oppression that if oppression were to end tomorrow, we would be likely to reproduce previous structures." When I read that, y'all, like my head exploded, right? Here is like an incredible, like futurist abolitionist that's basically saying that we are so thoroughly compromised, right, by the water and the air that we're breathing, that if all of this were to crumble tomorrow, we would be likely to reproduce that. And I see this as like an awesome cautionary like tale for all of us who are engaging in this work, because it means that we need to be rigorous and disciplined every day in the ways that we might be, right, acting out our shaping, right? That we might be in ways that are unconscious or invisible to us, right? Embodying, right, the dynamics of white supremacy, the dynamics of classism, right? The dynamics of colonization, right? And capitalism. And so like being in this work requires a constant practice of curiosity. And I would even call it like critical examination of the self, right? We don't like get into like really good ethical moral justice work and graduate from this practice, right? It's not like we do this work and then we can check it off a box and then we're in like a different state of consciousness. I'm sharing the function of culture with you and the way it works on us, in us, and in between us, so that you all can bring that level of rigor to how you show up, right? To how you learn, to how you make mistakes, right? To how you engage in repair and accountability, to how you build trust in relationships, right? Especially across lines of difference, especially across lines of difference. So now I want to pause and I'm going to offer a couple questions to you all for you all to reflect on. And then I'm just going to open up the space for conversation because I would imagine you're bubbling, or maybe you're stirred up, or maybe you're feeling all sorts of things in your body, or maybe your mind is racing. That tends to happen to me when I kind of like indulge in this much information, especially information that's sort of getting underneath the surface and getting into like my nooks and crannies and crevices and such. So I want to give you a little bit of time for reflection, and then I want to offer some space for sharing and for asking questions or for sharing insights that are coming up for you all. Okay. So I'm actually going to stop share and I'm going to put these questions into the chat so that you can see them. So the first question is about your social location. Okay. How does your social location, what you know of it in this moment, with the understanding that you get to do a deeper dive into this later, okay? How does your social location inform how you show up in social justice work? And I'm going to offer two sub questions, right? What are some of the limitations of your social location? And what might be some of the opportunities of your social location?
Like what I would say is like the relationship between like social location and then also social work is that if you come from a more privileged social location, you might be like aware of that social work that needs to be a necessity, but you might just feel so like disconnected that you might not even realize your real role in that, right? Like you might hear about it, you might be aware about it because it's constantly available in the news, but you might feel such like a personal disconnection for it to prevent work in the first place.
Tell me, what's your name?
I'm Aiden, by the way.
What is it, Dave?
Aiden.
David. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that curiosity, so I heard like a couple questions in what you shared, right? Like, how does my my social location relate um, uh, um, whether or not I can understand the actual impact of the social work that I'm doing, right? If it hasn't actually happened to me, right? Like, what does it mean for me to work with either like an issue or work with people who have been impacted by that issue when in fact that isn't my issue? Is that one of the things that was inside of what you said? Great question. Yeah. So I would call that potentially a limitation, right? When I think about like who, and I don't mean that as a critique, I mean that as like a level of awareness, right? Because when I think about who is best equipped to know what is needed, right, in different situations or around different issues, I always go to like who is the most impacted, right? Like who knows best? Those who are the most impacted, right? So what does it mean to be a person who hasn't, experienced that level of impact to be engaged in relationship and in action around that issue? What are some other things?
If there's time later, it would be nice to hear you
Yeah. Yeah. So, for me, it's funny because I think there's like a tension between like not getting like leaning back too much when it's not your issue or not something that you've been impacted by. And I also think that's also a cop out and a bypass, right? Because when we understand that a lot of our issues are interconnected, right? And that we have a mutual responsibility to the suffering that's all around us, then we have to engage. The question is, how do we engage? And I think the point that you just brought up, David, is a really important one. So when I'm engaging in an issue, that is not an issue that I have experienced either like on a visceral level or that I'm experiencing in a different way, I would say, right? Like race, I'm experiencing in a different way. My first impulse is to listen and to learn, right? So like, what do I not know about this issue? And to always go in with an assumption of like, I probably don't know is a very like humility is your best friend, right? If that's sort of like your location. And the other thing I would say really matters is building relationship, right? And so I know as a white-bodied facilitator, anytime I'm talking about issues or contexts from which I benefit, right? Or have more proximity to, that there's a level of trust building that I need to do in order to get in right relationship with people. And so I end up spending a lot of time building relationship, building trust, listening, learning, and not sort of like jumping into action, which tends to often short circuit relationship, right? And so the first thing I would say is defer, right, to those who know. The second thing I would say is like spend a lot of time building relationship and building trust, and that's not on your timeline often. And the third thing I would say about that is accountability, right? That in these particular scenarios, right, we have to be accountable to the people who are most impacted, right? Even if we're being of service to the issue, right? That doesn't inoculate or exempt us from accountability. And so what does it look like to create a culture, a practice, a relationship of accountability, right? With the folks who are closest to the issue. So those are three little. I would also say like, and this is more of a like caution, and this is where like being aware of internalizations really matters because those sort of patterns will come through your interactions, right? So for me, for example, I'm a like initiator. I love to be of service, and often the expression that what that takes when I'm not paying attention is it looks like me project leading. It looks like me trying to control or be a micromanager, right? Which are really not helpful behaviors, often also like extremely like dominant behaviors to be bringing to what I would imagine is a counterculture, right? Y'all are trying to create countercultures to the ones that we have inherited, right? In how you be and how you work together and in how you collaborate. So being curious about like what are the styles, the patterns, the behaviors I'm bringing, right? That might seem really familiar and so-called normal to me, that actually might be really harmful and might be keeping us in a cycle of sort of dominant paradigm, and always bringing that kind of like curiosity and questioning. I don't mean like be paranoid, y'all, like all the time about like how you're being, but just be like have that conversation be alive for you always. And not just alive for you, but like the people you're working with are going to give you feedback in their behavior and their willingness to work with you. Right. And maybe if they're really, really generous, they will give you that feedback literally and verbally and directly if they're really generous. And so take that feedback because that's often information we don't have because of the limited lens that we operate from, if in fact we're operating from a proximity to privilege. Are there other offerings about how does your social location inform how you show up? Any other thoughts, ideas, insights?
I just want to shout you out. Thank you for that context and the framework behind that. It's a beautiful invitation for folks, and really, yeah, it's deep and meaningful. So very appreciated. Thank
Scarlett.
you.
Thanks, Scarlett. Appreciate you. Anyone have any other things that are coming up for them around like why this, not just maybe what came up for you in your own answer, but why this question matters? Yeah. Hi.
A lot of this conversation about the limitations of our social location and what our social location means reminds me.
I'm wondering if you can come a little bit closer to the mic. Yeah, like rock star style. Come here, come closer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it is hard to hear the speakers.
I'm imagining the mic might be closer to where I am, not literally where I am, but yeah. So come on up. Sorry to be so awkward.
Hi.
Hi, better.
Better? Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, so much better. Thank you.
Now you can't see me, but you can hear me, which I think.
Completely.
So I was just a lot of this like practice of thinking about our social positioning and our social location in terms of engaging with social work, particularly social work that maybe it doesn't engage with identities that we are a part of, or working with identities that are different than ours, or that we have different positionality than. Makes me think a lot about the first chapter of the No Justice anthology, which talks about like the buffers that we have and certain buffers that people have between doing this work, and how when people are much closer to the issue, they have a lot of this work can really be reliving trauma or be triggering, and how I think for me, a lot of my social location provides me a buffer to do a lot of this work, which is a privilege and also really important to remember when working, especially when working with people on similar issues that we all have different positionalities in relation to the work, and the kinds of just what that means and having a distance from that issue.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And the other thing you're making me think about, so like, yeah, bringing that awareness is so important. Because it informs how we talk about issues with people who are like living them, right? Like that we can like bring like some like so-called objectivity to issues, which is not objective at all for people who are actually like living and maybe suffering inside of those issues. And what you're also bringing up is making me think about how also like not everyone is a monolith, and different people have different capacities for different levels of conversation and a different, willingness. And the thing I have to remember for myself often too is not to like stereotype or not assume people are a monolith who might have a shared experience or a shared identity. And the way to do that is to just get in relationship with them, right? Like relationship kind of defies these sort of homogenous groupings and assumptions that we make about different people and about their capacity to like show up or to be in a conversation. And I've learned that the hard way, the messy way, so many times, where I've like made an assumption to like hang back, or and folks have been like, no, come in, I want to talk about it, I have a capacity to talk about it, I have a desire to talk about it. And so I also want to invite you to bring that level of discernment, right? And remember that like even folks who share an identity and who share an experience are like unique humans inside of that experience. And when we're not in relationship, we're more likely to like apply a broad stroke across a group of people. And that's also not helpful, right? And so how do we like bring kind of some of that objectivity, but also, give people the benefit of the doubt and to explore in relationship where people's edges and buffers might be.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Anyone else have anything on this piece? And then I'm gonna ask one more question.
I have here I get a little closer too. I just have another like question in regards to like people's social location and then they're kind of like establishing these relationships. So like just to like put out a little bit of a like theoretical, how would these relationships be established in the first place if someone's coming from a place of like a lot of social location, a lot of privilege? I guess for example is how would you get these relationships started with maybe a bunch of high schools from Malibu or like Calabasas in relationship to, do you get the question I'm asking?
I think so. Are you asking about like how do we build relationships across difference? Is that your question?
Yeah, I guess that's
When there's not proximity? And who's asking? I can't see.
it's me.
Oh, it's you. Okay. Double whammy. I actually think this is a really good question because, some of the contradiction in relationship building is like relationship building is essential to this work, y'all, and you can't force relationship. You can't, right? Like, so I'm not telling you like go get yourself some friends, across like that's not what I'm saying, because that's probably not appropriate and it could be really harmful, actually. Relationship is a dynamic and alive process of like being with another person in all of our humanness. And there's no like blueprint for how to do that, right? Because every individual is like radically unique. So I want to like level set that. And I don't know that so I was telling you all as people who are going out into the field, right, to prioritize relationship building, right, over all things, right? Because I believe that we're more than what whiteness, colonization, class gender has told us we are, right? So like relationships defy those constructs, right? So that's really important. But also because you need to build trust if you're going to work with people. That is not the same as saying, take a group of people and force them into a room with a group of other people who are not like them. I don't know that doing that is always actually good, to be honest. And there's a practice right now around affinity spaces and caucusing. Do you all know about that? Like race-based caucusing or class-based caucusing. Have you ever heard of like caucusing or affinity spaces? Is there a yes or a? So it's when folks with a shared either identity or lived experience come together to process or heal or recover or work together, right? Without the gaze or the harm potentially of folks who are on the other side of that issue, right? So I do a lot of affinity. I facilitate a lot of race-based affinity spaces, right? Where I work with white-bodied folks or white adjacent folks or folks who are kind of navigating or grappling with white privilege in a setting that doesn't include Black, Indigenous people of color, right? Because it's a harm reduction strategy, but also because our work is really different. And so if, for example, you're working with a school of Malibu kids, it might be more skillful for you to work with those kids for a period of time, folks who I would assume have somewhat of a shared identity or experience with one another. And there's an enormous gradient within that assumption, I'm sure, before you actually try to bridge divides, right? Because often we try to bridge divides or build bridges before we've actually done the work within ourselves or within our like social groups, collective, and that can just be really messy and harmful. And so much I feel like of what I'm sharing with you and what I want you to bring to the work is like, how do we prepare ourselves, and how do we prepare the people that we're working with, right, to be more skillful and to have a greater capacity to navigate these sharp edges, right, that are holding us apart from one another, right? Whether we like it or intend it or not. And so relationship building as a way to kind of do your work, but that's not, but I don't want you to think that's a strategic imperative for all things. I think actually affinity work right now is really, really powerful. Especially folks with more proximity to privilege have a lot of catching up to do in like in history, in awareness, in perspective, in in like understanding the ways in which we've internalized logics of control and superiority and entitlement, right? And I also think that folks with more marginalized identities, right, also get a lot of comfort, right, from being in a healing space, right, from being able to do the recovery work, right, from systems of oppression without more privileged people in that space messing it up, which we often do. I think that there are lots of different expressions of relationship, right, within identity, across identity. And I would invite you to be really strategic and discerning about like what is right time, right? And what is the right medicine for a particular group, given where they are on sort of the journey, right, of discovery. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's a really good segue. The last question I wanted to leave you all with, given everything I've told you, and please know that this inquiry is ongoing. I've been in this inquiry for 2 decades and it continues to unfold for me. It's a bit like peeling an onion. There's just like more and more and more layers, right? The more you live into this inquiry of like, who am I, right? How have I been shaped, right? What's alive in me? What's expressed through me in relationship and work? The more aware you'll become of that. And it changes, right? It's not fixed. It's not static, right? You will change, y'all, in this work. And so given that, my last question for you is, what do you think your right role or responsibility is, right? What is your best contribution, not just from a place of like passion and skill and purpose, which I think matters, y'all. Like know what you're good at. Bring your passion to the table, right? And your whatever skills you have, bring all of that, right? But balance that with an awareness and a practice, right, around social location and socialization. And so that's my last question is, what do you think your right role is? What is your best contribution to the field of work that you're going to be going into, right? Given everything we've talked about today. So just take a moment to reflect on that. And that'll be our closing share. And I'll give you a challenge even. Frame it in the form of a question. Because sometimes I think when we write statements, they feel fixed and almost like commanding. And questions are amazing because there's so much possibility in questions, right? So for example, like a question I would hold, I'll just model this for you, is so I do a lot of work in sort of race-based spaces. And I think a question I'm holding in this moment is like, what does it look like to bring a responsibility around whiteness to my work? And also, imagine an expression beyond whiteness, like what's possible for me beyond whiteness, right? And how do I balance those two things, right? Because I can never put down whiteness ever. So I'm always responsible for it. But I'm living into this question like, what's beyond, right? Who am I beyond whiteness? Sonia Renee Taylor has this great quote that says, a question that might get us all free is, who am I beyond what whiteness told me I am? So what is a question, right, that you can ask about your right role and responsibility, given your unique social location, given the work that you're being called to? What is a question that you are holding? And I'll just open it up for anyone who feels inspired to share. What is a question you're bringing into this next phase? Someone who hasn't shared, if possible. The thing I love about questions is they don't have to have answers, but the answers often reveal themselves once we ask them. Anybody want to share? Yeah,
My name's Emily.
nice to meet you.
So I think one thing that I'm really reflecting on is trying to deeply understand why am I doing this? Like just asking myself why am I here at CASA, like in California, like trying to really understand like my deep intention, not just kind of what I generally tell people. And I feel like with understanding that more and more, I'll be able to understand like where my passion lies and like deeply who I am. I'm also a senior, and so like I feel like with understanding that can help guide me into like what after may look like too.
I love that. Thank you so much. That is a really, I mean, I've been asking that question for 25 years, so I don't know if you ever get a clear answer, but it has revealed itself along the way. And what it's revealed to me, and I hope it does this for you, is it's revealed what I yearn for more than anything else. And it's also revealed to me what breaks my heart, right? The places that I'm called to, the places I'm called to serve, the righteous places where I rage and I fight and I protest and I resist, right? Even if I'm not like directly impacted by some of those issues, there's something personal in it for me, and it has everything to do with what I yearn for and what breaks my heart. And those are really good nuggets to like dig into, because they will in fact point you exactly in the direction that you need to go. Thanks for that. I think we have time for one more. Anyone else feeling like called to share? All right.
Kerri, I just wanted to say, can I just pop in for a second?
Yeah.
It's so interesting because at the first week of class, I always do an exercise where students talk to each other in pairs and share. And one of the questions that I usually do, which I didn't do this year for the first time, is why are you here in this class and in this work? So I love that you and I have the same question and that you're going to answer something, even though I didn't include it. And I really encourage everyone to include that. All of this relates to the social autobiography paper that you're writing. They all have a paper due about all these questions you're asking.
Oh, yay.
So hopefully this will help if you haven't already fleshed that out, and you can continue. This paper will look different every time you write it, if you write it every year for the rest of your life. So I love that synergy. And I also just wanted to thank you, Kerri, for bringing up all of these different important questions and frameworks. and invite students to also think about this. I mean, Kerri's been focusing a little bit more on white supremacy and whiteness in large part because it's such a point of her work in racial justice, but
Yeah.
also think about this in terms of class, in
Yeah.
terms of gender, sexual orientation, ability, religion, right? There's so many spaces in which we can think about what dominant culture has socialized.
Yeah.
Where our location is, and race is like probably one of the biggest in our country, for really big reasons. But there's these other issues that are also really important and contingent on the ways in which you'll do the work and show up. So I encourage everyone to keep these same questions about location and think about it on the whole wheel as well.
I will follow up with resources too, because that wheel really helps, I think, bring in the ways in which those different categories overlap and also collude with one another. And so thank you for saying that.
I wish we had 10 more hours together, but
I know.
75 minutes we had, and especially in the midst of your grand tour across the nation doing racial justice work. So thank you for all that you're doing out there.
Yeah. So I feel so grateful to have met you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Scarlett. I will follow up with some materials and resources, and I'll leave you with this one note. This is a tool, a tip from Resma Menachem, who wrote a great book called My Grandmother's Hands. And he says that this work is like doing reps. Like if you go to the gym, you do like 12 reps. And like asking these questions and being in this inquiry is simply like doing reps. It's like reconditioning the body. So think of it like that and just keep going.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you,
Take care, everyone.
Kerri. Much love.
Much love. Thank you.